Hi, today's video is going to be about a really important subject. International migrations are movements of people living in or even between countries. According to the United Nations, there are about 200 million migrants in the world, and 16% of them are people who left undeveloped countries toward developed countries, with the United States, Europe, and Japan as the main destinations. But this new flow of international immigration, exacerbated by the inequalities between developed and undeveloped countries, must be understood from 2 points of view. The first one took place between the 1950s and the end of 1970s, when some European countries, the United States and Japan, encouraged immigration in order to obtain labor to fill the job vacancies that were not so popular. Qualifications and low pay desert jobs were despised by the local population. In this case, immigrants were then welcome but controlled. In second case, from the 80s onwards, the rise of neoliberalism and the intensification of the globalization process brought greater pressure to open markets and accelerated technical scientific development, and that brought about the acceleration of production and circulation of goods in the world. All these elements ended up allowing industry in rich countries to migrate around the world in search of new markets and cheap labor, generating growing unemployment and wage difference among workers in developed countries. Since then, with the exception of highly skilled workers from the poorer countries, the so-called brain drain, low-skilled workers would no longer be welcome, as they would directly compete for jobs with part of the local population, generating more and more discrimination and prejudice. You know the name of that, don't you? Xenophobia, from the Greek xeno, foreign, and phobia, fear. Xenophobia is like an aversion to immigrants, and it would become more and more evident in developed countries. This is due basically from the socio-cultural difference between people from different countries, and mainly to the tense relationship between workers from rich countries and foreigners coming from the poor countries who were vying to the same jobs. Unfortunately, even today, immigrants are seen many sometimes as a threat to the job market and a burden to the local economy, in addition to be seen as security threats. With this distorted view, governments and, in many cases, in this case, society itself becomes increasingly resistant to entry of foreigners. The governments of these rich countries began to create legal measures and even psycho barriers, while on the United States and Mexico border, while in the city of Salta in Spain, in order to make it increasingly difficult for immigrants to enter. In light of this, I believe that the great challenge for both poor and rich countries is much more than building walls or drafting laws that prevent the entry of migrants. Maybe it is the construction of a more just and egalitarian world in this century.